Hey everybody, we're going to continue on talking about metabolism today, and we're going to do a quick review. Last time we talked a little bit about spontaneous changes and how they can lower the free energy of a system. So I just want to give you some examples of a spontaneous change. The first example would be gravitational motion. So if you're up somewhere high and you fall, diffusion is another one. We talked about this in class a lot, how if you've got a high concentration, molecules want to spread out or diffuse, so go from high concentration to low concentration until they're at equilibrium. And also certain chemical reactions are also spontaneous and will happen on their own. And so that leads into this idea of what are chemical reactions, why are they important? And so they are the source of energy for living systems, and they are based on free energy changes. And we're going to focus on two general reaction types. The first is exergonic reactions, and this is going to be a chemical reaction that releases free energy. And then an endergonic reaction is a reaction that absorbs free energy from surroundings. So here are two graphs. This first one is the exergonic reaction, and so you can see here's the energy of the reactants. You do need a certain amount of energy to get this reaction started, and so this is the activation energy. But then overall, the products have a lower free energy than the reactants. So you have a decrease in free energy through the course of this reaction, so energy has been released. Then with this endergonic reaction, you can see the reactants have low free energy, the activation energy is much higher, and then the products have more energy than the reactants do. So energy was added to the system for the reaction to take place. We're going to focus on two main examples in this unit. So the main exergonic reaction is going to be respiration, and then endergonic will be photosynthesis. And so that's like the rest of the unit, that's what we're going to be talking about. So we talk about energy and we talk about how it's necessary for work. And it's easy to picture what work is for us, but what is work for a cell? And so it can be mechanical. So an example would be muscle contractions. It can be transport. We already talked about active transport and that you need energy to pump certain things across cell membranes. We also talked about making polymers, and so that is a chemical type of work that a cell needs energy for. And so what cells are able to do is couple an exergonic process to drive an endergonic one. So they take a process that releases energy and they use that to drive a process that requires energy. And so ATP is going to be used to couple these reactions together. And so here we have an example of an exergonic reaction. So we have food molecules that are going to need to be broken down. When those food molecules are broken down, you obviously release some carbon dioxide and some waste products, but you generate ATP in the process. And so here you have energy that's being created, and so, energy that is ATP that is being created that can move over here and actually power this endergonic reaction. So the energy is going to go into this reaction, and so here you're able to take some of these simple precursors, some of these building blocks, and actually build cell components. Now, after this reaction has taken place, the ATP has been used up and it's now ADP. And so it will cycle back to an exergonic reaction and ATP will be regenerated. And so these two reactions are coupled together. So the exergonic reaction produces ATP, which is the cellular energy source. That ATP then drives this endergonic reaction. When the ATP is used up, it gets recycled back. So I've been talking a lot about ATP, and ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It's made of adenine, which is a nitrogenous base, ribose, which we already talked about in class, that it's a pentose sugar, so a 5-carbon sugar. This is the sugar that you find in RNA. And then it also has 3 phosphate groups, which you get from that triphosphate. So here is a quick diagram. So here's your nitrogenous base, the adenine up here, you can see it's got the nitrogens. You have a 5-carbon sugar, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is your ribose, and now you have 3 of these phosphate groups that are held together. What I want you to pay attention to is that each one has this negative charge, okay? And so that is actually the key to ATP and how it holds energy. So those 3 phosphate groups are negative charges and they repel each other. That makes the phosphates unstable, and so when the bonds break in between, So if we take ADP, break this bond, we're left with ADP and a phosphate group that's just unattached. That's how energy is released. So the key to ATP is those 3 phosphate groups. And ATP is really important because it energizes other molecules by transferring those phosphate groups. So when those bonds are broken, phosphates are transferred and molecules become energized. We talk about ATP being an energy source for cells, which is a little bit different than how we talk about energy that we need. So we talk about energy that we need in terms of like the food that we consume. And so I want to do a quick comparison of ATP and food. So ATP is a renewable energy source. And it has very unstable bonds like we just talked about, so that the phosphates can energize other molecules. It's also really important because it's recyclable. So when ATP is broken down to ADP, it can then be remade into ATP at another location within the cell. And this is the kind of energy that we talk about when we're talking about cells. Then food is going to be long-term energy storage and much more stable bonds because it's long-term energy storage. So you want it to be stable for a long period of time. And so we've been talking about this idea that ATP cycles, and so energy released from ATP drives anabolic reactions. So again, anabolic is when you're adding smaller components together to make bigger ones. So the energy needed for that comes from ATP, and then it's actually recharged through these catabolic reactions. So when energy is released, when molecules are broken down, that energy is used to recharge ATP. So this is just kind of an example. So we can start here. We've got our ATP. So this is our higher energy molecule. This phosphate group can be transferred, which is going to essentially kind of energize something else, provide energy for cellular work. But when that happens, you're left with ADP, which is sort of like a partially charged battery. And so you want to be able to charge it back up. And so you do that by a condensation reaction. And so now you add another phosphate group back and you get back to ATP. So the fact that ATP recycles is very important. And it actually happens really quickly. So a cell's ATP content is recycled every minute. And humans use actually close to their body weight in ATP daily. So if ATP weren't recycled and it was something that we had to consume every day, that would be pretty hard to do because so much of it is used. And then I think the picture is kind of covering this up a little bit, but it says no ATP production equals quick death. And so that leads into your lecture question. So I want you guys to send me a message and explain how ATP might be linked to a cell receiving a signal for apoptosis. So what organelles would be involved? How is ATP linked to a cell that might be receiving a signal for programmed cell death? All right, so that's kind of stuff that we've talked about in the previous unit, tying together with what we're covering right now. So, all right, thanks guys.